Well, all mass shootings are tragedies, of course, especially school shootings, but an attack on an elementary school reaches the deepest levels of demonic depravity. If you're a parent of elementary school-age children, as I am, you can't help but imagine yourself in the position that so many parents in Uvalde, Texas are in today, and it's enough to take your breath away. Unthinkable, unspeakable, horrific. An event as shocking and terrible as this could be a moment of unity for the nation. It would be fleeting, of course. It would not last very long, but at least for a time, however brief, you would hope that we could come together in grief and mourning over children whose lives were taken, and also the many more children whose lives are now forever altered by the horrors that they witnessed. It could be time for some real soul searching. I mean, actual soul searching, as in searching our souls to figure out what the hell has gone so wrong in our society. But a symptom of our peculiar national soul sickness is that we don't have moments like this, and we certainly don't engage in any real introspection, ever. Our leaders help to make sure of that, which is why President Biden addressed the nation in prime time last night, spent all of about 2 minutes expressing his sorrow over the 19 murdered children, and then launched into a political stump speech about the gun lobby and Republicans, and that's how he spent the remainder of his remarks. Listen.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? It's been 3,448 days, 10 years since I stood up at a high school in Connecticut, a grade school in Connecticut, where another gunman massacred 26 people, including 20 first graders at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Since then, there have been over 900 incidents of gunfires reported on school grounds. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Santa Fe High School in Texas. Oxford High School in Michigan. The list goes on, and the list grows when it includes mass shootings at places like movie theaters, houses of worship, as we saw just 10 days ago, the grocery store in Buffalo, New York. I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage. I spent my career as a senator and a vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. We can and won't prevent every tragedy, but we know they work. And the gun manufacturers have spent 2 decades aggressively marketing assault weapons, which make them the most and largest profit. For God's sake, we have to have the courage to stand up to the industry.
Now, words cannot express how sickening that performance was. Instead of trying to unite the nation in our grief, Biden chose politics. The bodies hadn't even all been identified yet. They were still taking DNA swabs from parents so they could match them to the victims. And Biden was already taking pot shots at his favorite political targets. Of course, the entire Democrat Party and almost all the corporate media has taken this same cue. Now, the shooter is Hispanic, attacking a predominantly Hispanic school, so there's no useful racial narrative for the vultures to exploit. And that means they go right to gun control, and that's been the story since last night because they've decided to make it the story.
And at this time, I will pass the mic to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Sit down.
You're out of line and an embarrassment.
Sit down and don't play this stuff.
Next shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a bitch that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue.
This morning, Michael Moore was on MSNBC ranting about repealing the Second Amendment, just like repealing it outright. That's how far they'll go in exploiting tragedy. But just as they are standing on the bodies of dead children to make their political points, they're also stepping over the facts, ignoring them completely. Because the fact of the matter is that none of the recent mass shootings would have been prevented by any of the quote-unquote common sense gun control regulations Democrats like Biden are proposing. None of them. You could take away every gun, and that still wouldn't stop the attacks. The terrorist in Waukesha just used his car instead of a gun. The worst school attack in U.S. history happened in 1927. 45 people died. Not one gun was fired because the killer used explosives. So what laws? What law will stop this? Before we ask how a mass shooter got his hands on the gun he used to commit his crime, or even how he was able to access the school grounds in order to commit his crime, shouldn't we ask why he wanted to do that in the first place? What's gone wrong inside his mind and his soul? There is a terrible spiritual sickness permeating our society. We seem to be producing a lot of these kinds of people. Evil has a deep foothold here. We scratch at the surface of the problem. We never look beneath. If ever we did, we would find certain themes emerging. He didn't have a stable home life. He spent most of his life online, staring at screens, isolated from other flesh and blood humans. He almost certainly didn't have any friends, or very many. Probably didn't have a girlfriend. He didn't have much or any moral or spiritual formation. He was empty, nihilistic, despairing. He had no purpose or direction. This is the case for almost all of the mass shooters. That's why I can predict it. And if this was not the case for him, he's an outlier. But it almost certainly is. This is also the case, by the way, for almost all the violent criminals in our cities. All this applies to them, too. It's the actual source of the crisis. It's what makes the sorts of people who do these sorts of things. The people who we try to contain or control with laws, but no law in itself can make a man safe if he is corrupt and evil to his core. You know, if he's the kind of man who would want to do something like this, he's never going to be safe. You're never going to be safe around him. The real solution is one that makes war against that evil, right? The evil down there at the core. And we are not serious about addressing the problem until we resolve to address that problem.